Welcome, everyone. Nice sunny day here in the Midwest. My name is Lisa Anderson, and it is my pleasure to be the MC today for the Women in Wellbeing Seminar, Connecting with Nature. I'm a nurse administrator in what we call the I-90 corridor. Austin and Albert Lee are my primary responsibilities, along with Southeast Clinic. And I've had the privilege for the past 2 years of being really involved with the COVID initiatives, and right now hoping that that will decrease a little bit. So again, thank you for joining today's webinar. Today you'll learn how to reconnect with nature and make some time for wellness, and that is so important for us. Throughout today's session, if you click on the Q&A, please at any time put questions in. At the end of each session, we will go over your questions. So next slide. I am pleased to be able to introduce to you today. We have two speakers. Emily Schmidt is a dietitian, and she will discuss the benefits of getting closer to nature and incorporating more natural foods in our diet that can improve and possibly prevent health conditions. Jody Smith, a nurse practitioner, will discuss the physical and mental health benefits of being in nature and how to incorporate green time into our busy techie worlds. We've already gone over the Q&A. Please take time and put your questions in. And the session will be recorded, the entire seminar. So we're going to kick this off with Emily. I hope you're ready, Emily. Emily is a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic and has been with Mayo Clinic for 9 years. She obtained her master's degree from Central Michigan University in 2019 with her bachelor's degree from Viterbo University in 2013. Emily enjoys sharing evidence-based nutrition information with her patients and the community. She regularly counsels patients regarding incorporating more whole plant-based foods into their regular eating patterns for for lots of healthy reasons. So Emily, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to present. This is a great opportunity, and I love the topic. I do want to point out that I have a wonderful intern. His last day is today, actually. Austin Crows. He is from Viterbo University, and he helped me. Actually, he did put together this whole PowerPoint. I will give him the credit for that. I gave some pointers, but for the most part, he came up with this. So to get started, so there's a concept or an eating pattern that has become well known, and there's a spectrum with this. There's some more formal ways of following this style of diet, but we can talk about maybe more so just incorporating some of the principles of it. So a whole food plant-based diet is, I think, a perfect example of when we talk about connecting with nature and wellness, and what we can do that's more natural regarding how we eat, is that's ultimately going to have such an impact on our physical health in many ways, and our mental health. So the whole food plant-based diet, there is actually a Mayo educational material on this as well that walks you through this diet. It's more so focusing on plant-based foods with not an emphasis on the animal products at all. But I will be talking a bit about, for the animal products, what are some healthier, better quality, closer to nature examples. So you might be wondering, well, how is this different from vegetarian and vegan? The big difference is more so looking at the level of processing of foods. So for instance, this is, getting closer to nature. We're looking at things that are closer to their natural state, foods that are less processed versus, there's different levels of processing. We have some things that maybe require certain foods that have some low levels of processing compared to others that may be very heavily processed. So it's kind of a spectrum with that as well. There's different levels of quality, levels of processing. So nice statistic here. 60% of total calories in the average US diet are from ultra processed foods. So to expand on that a bit, when we look at the different levels of processing, of course, we start with the unprocessed or minimally processed. And I think most foods that we eat to some extent are processed. Even if you think of just purchasing produce from the store, for instance, yes, it's still pretty fresh, close to its natural state. But still, like the lettuce, for instance, it's been washed and cleaned up and things like that. So the preservation as well, there's certain things that they may add to produce, for example, like it's still minimally processed, but they may add certain things to preserve. But really the big focus when we're talking about getting more closer to a whole food diet is focusing more on those minimally processed foods. So other examples, I would definitely include most of your, fresh fruits and vegetables. A lot of those things where, if you look at an apple, for instance, that's pretty close to what you're going to see from the tree. So I think just envisioning, how close is this to its natural state. Whereas if we look at, I certainly still do believe that all foods fit in moderation, and it's not a matter of totally vilifying or never eating processed foods, but looking at, on the slide here, some of the examples of those more heavily processed foods, it becomes a little bit more difficult to say, okay, what actual whole foods did these things come from? We can say, okay, well, the chips at one point were potatoes, but it's definitely taken multiple steps of processing to get to that point. The concern there is that, when we look at some more of these processed foods, and especially the ultra processed foods, more and more things are added that start to reduce, I would say, the overall health or quality of that. So for instance, if you are starting with, go back to the apple example, if you have just a straight apple, that's about as whole as you can get. But now if we take that a step further and maybe we're making applesauce, that's a little bit more processed. Now let's say we turn that into apple juice, and not only are we having that juice, but maybe now we've added a lot of high fructose corn syrup or extra sugars to that. And then the ultra processed foods, I would consider these as, really probably a good example here on the diagram is a lot of those, like the cheese puffs and the candies and different things like that. So it's not a matter of saying, oh, never eat any processed foods, only eat unprocessed or minimally processed. I would say moving in the direction of trying to do more whole foods versus, just eliminating any processed foods at all. So it's more of that balance. So why should we focus more on the whole foods? More of our fruits, our vegetables, our whole grains. Other good examples are nuts and seeds, legumes, even things like herbs and spices, tofu. So looking at a big component of all of this is fiber. So you've probably heard some about fiber, maybe helps with digestion. Some people may recognize it as helping to lower cholesterol or blood sugars. Overall, there's a lot of reasons, very evidence-based, lots of research to show this, why fiber is a very necessary and large part of our diet. If going back to that statistics of 60% of people in this country getting most of their calories from ultra processed foods, or 60% of the foods being ultra processed foods, we start to lose some of that fiber. A lot of times that the level of processing is what's removing some of that fiber. So for instance, and this kind of goes along with the whole grains, if we have a whole grain, multi-grain, some nice seeds and lots of grains in their bread, that would be considered much less processed and higher fiber than if we look at a more heavily refined or processed white bread. One of the big things that they strip away with some of those grains when you're getting more to those refined grains is the fiber. Also protein and a lot of different vitamins, minerals, antioxidants. So you're really getting a lot more of what's naturally in that food when you choose things like the whole grains and these other plant-based foods. So good fats, we also look at a lot of these, avocados, that's kind of the little icon there, but nuts and seeds, olive oil, those kinds of things are going to also contain more of those heart-healthy fats. So, there's different types of fats. We look at some that are maybe a little more heavily processed, hydrogenated oils, saturated fats are commonly found naturally, but are not as great for heart health. So, a lot of these plant-based foods have just very high quality fats, I would say. When we say micronutrients, that's talking about all of the different vitamins and minerals. So I get the question a lot, should I take a multivitamin or should I take supplements? Your whole foods are actually the best source. You really want to get your nutrients from food first. So, there's nothing wrong with multivitamins or supplements, especially if there's a, real medical need for that, if someone has an iron deficiency or other deficiencies. But for the most part, you really want to strive to get the majority, if not, all of your nutrients from the foods that you're eating. There's better absorption for this. So our body does actually absorb the nutrients better when it's coming from, these actual whole foods compared to the supplements. Otherwise, antioxidants can be very useful for basically helping protect you or repair damage, ultimately leading to reduced risk of cancer. So when we look at just chronic diseases in general, things like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, I could go on and on. There's so much research indicating that more of a plant-based diet is very beneficial for potentially preventing some of those things. I like the concept of kind of a blend of, maybe, and some people very successfully follow vegan, which is no animal products at all, diets, and others are vegetarians where they may still include animal products but avoid meat. I think that it's different for everyone. There's no one size fits all diet or eating pattern. It really needs to be individualized to the person. There are some people who choose to avoid animal products for environmental reasons, or, there's a multitude of reasons that people would be vegetarian or vegan. But just know that you don't have to avoid animal foods either in an attempt to increase your plant-based foods. So it's okay to do, a combination. I would say start where you're currently at. So for instance, if you say, hey, I'm mostly actually eating animal products, lots of meats and dairy, and that tends to be the primary food group that you're eating, then just gradually shift to more plant-based foods, incorporate one extra vegetable a day, or maybe switch your bread to whole grain, and just very gradually change some of those things. Including, when we are including animal food sources, though, it definitely makes a big difference to choose the less processed. So when we look at things like the cancer risk, chronic disease risk, damage to our body, certainly it's going to be the minimally processed animal products. So some examples of that would be, if we're looking at, if we were to take chicken, for example, if you have more of just a whole chicken that you're preparing and taking meat from there, compared to if maybe you had a heavily processed, perhaps chicken sausage, maybe that they've added a lot of sodium, maybe they've added a lot of different ingredients or things that, it's definitely not just the chicken anymore. And that's not always a bad thing. I think actually processing in our foods allows for better food security, people having enough to eat. If we completely avoided any levels of processing, I think that would be very difficult for most people in our society. But that's just an example of, if you tend to, for meats, for animal products, if you think, oh, most of the time actually I'm eating things like sausage and ham and bacon and more of those processed meats that have extra ingredients and extra levels of processing going into them, considering, okay, maybe I should include some more less processed, like whole fish, wild caught fish, or if you're doing eggs, for instance, just, plain eggs on their own. If you're doing more of the leaner, like the chicken breast or lean ground beef or turkey compared to the higher fat. So I think the quality of the animal sources is more important than necessarily saying that you have to avoid them altogether. For many people, it is easier to get a lot of the micronutrients from the animal source foods. Of course, a vegan diet is still very possible to be extremely healthy and get all of your nutrients as well. But I just kind of like to provide a perspective for all people, wherever they lie on kind of the spectrum of animal versus plant foods. Going to, the protein, I think a lot of people think immediately of, well, if I'm shifting to more plant-based foods and doing less animal-based, should I be concerned about protein? And you truly can get a lot of protein from your plant-based food sources as well. So yes, the animal sources, as you can see here, Austin has pointed out that you're getting more of those amino acid, more complete forms, and that it's often easier sometimes to get some more of those higher quality proteins, but that doesn't mean that you aren't getting high quality protein from plant-based foods either. So things like legumes, so beans and peas, lentils, nuts and seeds, even whole grains. There's a lot of high protein or protein including plant-based foods. Soy is also another great source. So essentially, my overall advice when we're talking about getting closer to nature with the foods that we eat, and how can we nourish our bodies with things that are maybe less, not necessarily totally avoid, but less things on that heavily processed level. So I think a variety of consuming plant foods and animal products, if that's what is right for you. I think if you're unsure about kind of the right blend for you, one issue may be if you have certain medical conditions that maybe prohibit you from eating certain plant-based foods. I know some people have different digestive issues, for example, that may make it hard to eat certain raw fruits and vegetables, nuts and seeds, that kind of thing. Definitely, connect with a dietitian, get a referral to a dietitian if you feel you need kind of a more individualized plan or recommendations for yourself, because it may look different for everybody. Ideally, looking at a lot of these more fresh fruits and vegetables, or even the frozen, a lot of times they're still pretty minimally processed. That might be great for most people, but I have some patients who come in and say, my digestion can't handle a lot of the raw, so maybe we'll talk more about cooked or methods for how they can make it work for them. So typically with nutrition, it's not one size fits all. It's individualized for the person. I also like to think of the plate method just in general, whether we're talking about plant-based or whatever type of food pattern we're talking about, the plate method can be extremely helpful. So if you haven't seen that before, it's essentially half of your plate being non-starchy vegetables or fruits, I should say. A fourth of your plate, your protein source, and then a fourth of your plate, your starch or grain. So for example, a good meal that you could consider more plant-based, more whole foods that would fit within that. Maybe if you had maybe a lettuce salad with, if you had maybe some nuts and some beans as your protein, and then you could throw on whatever vegetables and fruit. If you did, maybe you could even use, instead of more of a heavily processed dressing, use maybe like a oil vinegar based dressing instead, like a vinaigrette. And then for your starch or grain, you could even, you know, off to the side, or maybe even for dessert, you could have let's see, like some granola perhaps with some yogurt. So it's you know, it needs to be things that you enjoy, that that is right for you. But I think just when you're trying to choose more natural food sources, just considering, you know, how heavily has this been processed? What percentage do I think my diet is of heavily processed versus less processed? And just making gradual changes from there. So if you, you know, right now think half of your diet is mostly pretty heavily processed foods, don't be too hard on yourself and say, oh, I need to completely avoid, you know, all of this now. Just start gradually including more plant-based, more whole plant-based foods, one thing at a time. And then also considering with the animal proteins, or just the animal products in general, whether it's dairy or meat, you know, to what level of processing. So if you're having a, you know, like a nice lean pork chop or loin compared to a, you know, hot dog, for instance, that's a good example of the heavily processed compared to a less processed meat. Or even something like yogurt, you know, looking at more of a plain, less processed yogurt, a Greek yogurt, maybe higher protein compared to a really added sugar, lots of extra ingredients, sugars, sweeteners, that kind of stuff. So other than that, I believe we will have a question Q&A
Emily?
at the end, correct?
Nope, I've got a question, and it's a really good question, and
Okay.
we'll do that question, and then we'll convert over to Jody if there's no other questions. But this is an excellent question. Is organic closer to nature form, or is conventional produce still okay? It's hard to buy organic due to cost.
So organic is typically more so referring to how the foods are grown. So with organics, they're not using as many man-made you know, pesticides and herbicides, those kinds of things. So the thing with organic though is that there still typically are, you know, pesticides, herbicides used. They're just more so natural forms. So ultimately, you know, when we look at the research, there may be some benefits of the organic, but in general, you do not have to eat organic, especially if you are on a strict budget. It's tough for you to find that. I would say in general, don't worry so much. I mean, you certainly can if that's a priority for you, but if you're trying to be healthier, just aim for more whole plant-based foods, whether they're organic or not. You'll still see positive impact to your health, even with the non-organic.
Another good question here. Do artificial sugars impact our health?
So I would say in general, small amounts, if you're having occasional, you know, Splenda, an occasional diet soda here and there, no, we're not going to see massive health effects. I know there's research indicating that large amounts of artificial sweeteners may have negative health effects, but I think so much of this in the nutrition world in general comes down to the dose. How much are you actually consuming? If you're eating a pretty healthy diet 80-90% of the time and you throw in things like a few artificial sweeteners there, it's fine.
Okay. And Emily, I'm going to ask if you can answer some of the other ones in the actual Q&A so that I can queue up Jody, because I know Jody's got
Yep.
her presentation ready to go, because we've got good questions here to answer. So next on our agenda is Jody Smith. Jody is a nurse practitioner in community internal medicine and sleep medicine at Mayo Clinic Health System, Owatonna. She has practiced there for over 10 years. She's an instructor of medicine at Mayo Clinic College of Medicine and Science. She has a leadership and supervisory role for the advanced practice providers in primary care and medical specialties at Mayo Clinic Health System, Owatonna and Faribault. Dr. Smith received her Bachelor of Science in Nursing degree at Baker's University in Topeka, Kansas, followed by her Master's of Science in Nursing and Doctor of Nursing practice degrees at the University of Kansas Medical Center in Kansas City. She's on a quest to visit and hike in every Minnesota state park with her husband of 19 years and their 2 school-age children. She loves being involved with her kids, scout groups, running, music, and exploring new places and things. Welcome, Jody, and we're excited to hear what you have to tell us about getting back to nature.
Thank you so much, Lisa, and appreciate you having me here today. So I will share my screen so you guys can see my PowerPoint presentation. Emily, great job on your presentation. Really nice to see how we can change our eating habits to improve our health and well-being. Today I'm going to talk about why it's important for us to seek out nature in our everyday lives, and how we can do that when we're extremely busy, and physiologically what that can do to us. So first of all, I just want to talk a little bit about stress, because we all have stress in our lives. It's completely normal. There are different kinds of stress though. So there are good stressors like getting a new job or getting a promotion or being tagged to have a project at work that kind of challenges us. Maybe we have a new hobby, or we set a goal for ourselves. Having a new baby or getting married, traveling, moving, those are all stressors in our life that can cause some temporary stress, but ultimately challenge us and make us more resilient people, contribute to our growth as a person, or help shape our worldview. So those are good stressors in our lives. But we also know that there are a lot of negative stressors in our lives too, and some of those things that we really can't control. It's those types of stressors that are kind of cumulative and chronic negative stress that contributes to distress. And that's the kind of stress that every single one of us are exposed to, and we have to be able to figure out how to handle that in order to improve our overall well-being. One particular stressor I just want to point out, because it's so relevant to us today, is technology. And technology is really great. It's the reason why we are here today and we can see each other from multiple different places. We know that it's advanced our society, but there are some negatives to technology as well. So texts, emails, phones, those are not passive signals. They require our attention. They distract us from other things around us. It's not uncommon for folks to feel like they have to compulsively share updates or feel the need to be connected, or did I get a response, and those types of things. It takes a lot of brain power to be constantly attentive to that kind of technology, which is really a part of our everyday lives nowadays. We know that higher social media and technology use in preteen girls contributes to them being less developed socially and emotionally than girls who don't have as much access to that kind of technology. We also know that little kiddos, so toddlers and school-age children, the more screen time and technology that they're exposed to, the more likely they are to be less developed as well too. We also know that the world is more urbanized than ever before. So as of 2008, per the World Health Organization, more people lived in urban areas than in rural areas. And cities are wonderful. I lived in Kansas City for several years. They're exciting, they're energetic, but they can be stressful places to be. So highway driving, figuring out parking, billboards all over the place, even public transportation can be very, very stressful. So the more exposed we are to that kind of stress, the more stressed we are as well. There's also something to be said about the noise of living kind of in a city all the time. So studies have shown that people who live in noisy places, like near airports, are more likely to be on blood pressure medications than people who were not living in a noisy place. Kids living in very noisy environments had, on average, a 2-month delay in development for every 5 decibel average increase in sound that in their living environment. So the other crazy thing about that too is we don't habituate to it as much as we think that maybe we would. So after 3 to 4 weeks, even though if you have a train running by your house every day and you're able to finally sleep through those trains, physiologically, studies have shown that even if we don't wake up, our blood pressure and our pulse rates will increase when that train passes by. So, noise annoyance causes stress too. So whether it's an acute stressor or whether it's kind of that low-grade chronic stress, what does that do to our bodies? Well, first of all, stress stimulates what we call the fight or flight response. So it's our sympathetic nervous system response, which is actually our body's just natural response to a threat. So for example, if we are walking down a sidewalk and minding your business, and then all of a sudden a big dog starts running towards you and growling and barking at you, your blood pressure is probably going to rise. You're probably going to feel your heart start to beat faster, and you go, I either need to run away and hope I can run faster than this dog, or I need to be ready to fight this dog so that I can stay safe. So that is really what the fight or flight response is. And even though it might not be that, obvious of a situation, those daily stressors contribute to a low-grade fight or flight response. So what happens in our body is you have adrenal glands, which are little glands that sit on top of your kidneys, and they release a hormone called cortisol. It's your stress hormone, and that's what makes your blood sugar go up, your heart rate go up, your blood pressure go up. And that is helping our bodies to respond to whatever stimulus is causing us to either feel like we need to fight or flight. And we also know that mental fatigue often causes psychological stress too. So when we're under stress, we're more irritable, we're more anxious, we can't concentrate as well, our executive functioning. So for example, memory, problem solving, those abilities go down as well. Our mood isn't as good when we're not feeling very good, and we don't sleep as well. We also know that people who are stressed out, because of their physiological response and the psychological response, they tend to be sicker more often as well. So you're more likely to develop, colds and general illnesses as well. And all of these symptoms on a chronic level can contribute to a lot of chronic health problems if we don't know how to manage them. So we know that stress causes increased healthcare costs, which is not something that we want to contribute to. So I want to have you imagine that you are at work, you're working overtime, you have a deadline that you have to meet, but even though you have more work to do, you have to rush home, you have to make dinner because your kid has something going on at night. But you get home and they can't find matching socks, and the ride's out in the driveway and they're honking because they're running late, and you're trying to get them out the door, but you know that you need to go to visit your mom because she's struggling, she's not feeling well, she needs help around the house. And you grab your phone and you realize there's a text from your neighbor. They need their shop vac back that you borrowed yesterday because the fridge is leaking all over the fridge or all over the kitchen floor. And as you're trying to respond, you get a notification saying that something interesting happened at the Johnny Depp trial. So I'm really interested in that. So I'm going to click on that. But then as I'm clicking on my phone, I realize the date and I have to scrap all my plans because it's actually our anniversary and I forgot about that. So that is a stressful night. And, all nights might not be like that, but what can you do in that situation to try and just calm down? Well, there are a lot of really good coping mechanisms out there, and I'm sure some of you have some coping techniques, but I'm going to tell you that the fastest and easiest way to calm down for, again, some of those acute stressors, but also just chronic stresses. And even if you're feeling good, how to maintain feeling good is to go outside. Take a moment, take a break, smell the flowers in the trees, listen to the wind rustling through the trees, the water rushing over the rocks, feel the warm sun on your skin, and just be present in nature. And I know what you're going to say. How do I walk away from that situation? I can't walk away. I have so many things I got to address. I'm going to tell you a secret. People can take care of themselves. I think as women, so many times we feel like we have to take care of everyone and do everything. You don't have to do that. Let people take care of themselves. And some of those problems will, you know what, they're going to wait on you, and you don't have to address them right now. Take that time that you need to calm down. It's something I read in a book, actually when I was in school back in 2017 for my doctorate, that was talking about how if you go on vacation from work and you're gone for a whole week, if you continue to check your email and respond to all those emails through your vacation, it's going to cause you to be very stressed out, and you're probably going to end up doing more work. Because if you just go on your vacation, tell people I'm going to be gone, here's your backup, and then here's your resources for any problems that arise. When you get back from vacation, half of those problems that you've been emailed about will probably have been resolved by then. So this is the same situation. Just take some time, take your moment to be able to get in a good mindset yourself, so that you'll be in a better place to be able to address some of those issues that you really do need to address. So if you're feeling stressed, get yourself out into nature, and then you'll feel better. It's that simple. So again, similarly, kind of how we talked about what nature does, or what stress does to us. Studies have shown that being in nature, actually, so the study was that people were exposed to really scary movies. And then after being exposed to scary movies, they had people either walk outside in an urban environment or in nature, or not go outside at all. And they found that being in nature can reduce that sympathetic or fight or flight response back to normal levels within 5 minutes. In an urban environment, it was still better than not being outside at all, but it was only halfway to normal after 10 plus minutes. So we know that being in nature will reduce your cortisol, which is that stress hormone, which will subsequently reduce your heart rate and your blood pressure. Interestingly, small kids who are outside more often have less nearsightedness, because natural sunlight impacts the shape of their eyes as they develop, and so they have less nearsightedness. And there has been many studies on the impact of nature on our mental health and cognitive function. So we know that being out in nature can improve word association, problem solving, creativity. People could remember 20% more after a walk through trees than through a walk through busy streets. Also, there's been studies on preteen boys who consider themselves to be gamers, so who have a lot of screen time, and when immersed in nature, so for a couple of days, pretty much going on a camping trip, they reported increased levels of happiness, lowered anxiety, they felt more optimistic about their future, higher levels of self-esteem, and then again, some of those physiological indicators like lower cortisol levels, lower blood pressures, and things like that as well. And then when we feel better, our mood is better and we sleep better too. I mentioned earlier that stress can make us sick, and certainly feeling better makes us not be sick as often either, but there is a white blood cell in our body called natural killer cells, and those are types of cells that help fight against viruses and tumor cells in a very early stage of our immune response. So it has been shown that after so in Japan, they do a lot of work on nature. They have things called forest bathing. So it's very big in Japan, and they do a lot of studies on the benefits of nature. There was a researcher who checked natural killer cell activity in people before a trip outside, and then they had people do 2 nights and 3 days in nature, and then they continued to follow their natural killer cell levels in their bloodstream. And they found that natural killer cell quantities were significantly increased after that trip in nature, and they actually stayed up for up to 30 days after being in nature. So there's a lingering benefit as well to being in nature. And we know that people who spend less time in nature or who live in areas with fewer trees not only have significantly higher levels of stress, but they also have higher rates of chronic disease and even mortality than people who don't spend as much time in a higher density of trees. So we need this restorative reprieve to recover physiologically and psychologically. Just a little note on mental health. It's a huge problem in our world right now. A ton of people struggle with mental health. That is, we don't have the resources to be able to care for people like we really want to. And nature has been shown to improve symptoms and conditions that are listed up here. So we know, again, that being out in nature contributes to stronger positive emotions, lower negative emotions, also less rumination, which means just kind of like continuing to think about something. You can't quite get over it, you can't move on. Less symptoms of narcissism, thinking about me all the time. Actually less road rage, which I feel like I experienced recently because we drove down to Colorado for spring break, and we were out it was beautiful, and we came to a road construction. It was a 2-lane road, and it was one of those road constructions where they only had 1 lane open. So one direction goes and you have to wait for that direction to go, and then it's your turn. And we were sitting there for at least half an hour, and it was me and my husband and our 2 kids who are school age, elementary school age. And you know what? We were okay. And I'm pretty sure that it was because we were surrounded in beautiful natural surroundings. I don't know that we would have been in as good of a mood if we were in the middle of the city. Actually, I can pretty much say that we probably would not. So I'm happy that we got through that, and it ended up being totally fine. So specifically on this slide, PTSD, which is post-traumatic stress disorder, and ADHD, which is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Those 2 conditions in particular really benefit from more prolonged immersion in nature. So there's been a lot of studies on the benefits of having treatment programs for those conditions where their treatments are outside every day, or maybe they even go on a 2 to 4 week nature kind of excursion that includes psychotherapy and things like that. So studies have shown that people with PTSD can have up to a 20% reduction in flashbacks, emotional numbing, and hyperarousal. And kids with ADHD can reduce inattention and hyperactivity, even as a parent reported kind of observation. Some of kids with ADHD actually were able to memorize number sequences up to the same as someone who would be considered without ADHD after prolonged immersion in nature. So really great research on the benefits of nature in some of those conditions. So what is it about nature that is so magical? It really is simple. We humans have spent most of their existence in nature, and our physiology is still adapted to it. So we feel comfortable knowing there's a water source right there, and that we have a snack with those blueberries in the bushes right there, and that large tree is going to give us shade and shelter. In nature, we have less choices. We don't need to filter and choose what is going to grab our attention. It allows for deeper thoughts. There's a term called soft fascination, which means that when you're out in nature, you can look at a beautiful flower or the sunrise, or how the sky turns different colors at sunset, or even how a tree is growing out of a bluff and it doesn't even seem like there's any dirt there. So you can wonder about those things, but it's okay if you never find out the answer. So it doesn't direct your attention. It's just that soft fascination. Also, actually, just being outdoors. So soil, there's a bacteria in soil called Mycobacterium vaccae, and exposure to that bacteria, which is very common, harmless, in fact, it's beneficial, increases the levels of serotonin, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain that can work pretty much like an antidepressant. In fact, most of the antidepressants that we prescribe in the clinic work on serotonin. So getting your hands dirty and eating those root vegetables, those actually can improve your mood just with that. We know also that trees and plants give out smells that can be really therapeutic, which is why aromatherapy is such a big thing, because lavender, rosemary, pine scents, cypress trees, those can lower cortisol and sharpen your focus, improve sleep, similar to meditation. In fact, oil from cypress trees has been also shown to increase those natural killer cells that can improve our immunity that we talked about earlier too. When it's dry, the oils from trees and plants collect on the soil and rocks. So when it rains, then the water releases those oils and it smells amazing, which is why after it rains, then you can just go outside and it's like a whole therapeutic experience. It's wonderful. Of course, we know that trees are filters for pollutants and things like that too. They remove particulate matter from the air from cars and things like that. The sound of rustling water, water rushing over rocks and waterfalls, and actually bird song. There are studies that show that that increases our mood and mental alertness. And then even patterns that are formed by clouds and the way that the trees kind of go up in their branches and snowflakes and flowers, that is visually appealing to our eyes to the point that actually it can improve our mood and regulate our emotions as well. So, okay, in our everyday lives, what can we do to, capitalize on this? Well, okay, Jody, I work in the middle of the city. What am I supposed to do? I can't just walk outside and be in a state park, Well, what I would say is even if you have to walk a little ways through your city to find a little park or even a bench with bushes around it that a bird might be at, find that location for you. They're there. And if they're not there, lobby for that. It's so important in cities to have places like this. See if you can plant some trees. Go to your city commission and lobby for this kind of stuff. It is extremely important. Actually, I mentioned that in Japan that nature is a big thing there. So around the world, they're catching on to this as well. So for example, in Scotland, access to nature is actually considered a national indicator of health. In Singapore, they have a goal of 80% of the population living within 400 meters of green space because so much data is out there from studies showing how beneficial it is, even in an urban environment, to have a little natural reprieve. There was a study looking at how many trees in different neighborhoods and how there were and how it impacts their health. And they found that an average of 11 more trees on a city block was associated with lower blood pressure, diabetes, and obesity in the people that lived there. So even in your own streets and neighborhoods, plant some trees and see if you can get some more green space in your living areas. And at work, if we are working from home or working in an office environment or a cube, well, what can we do in that situation? We spend a lot of time in general at work. And there, first of all, have some photos that look like it's outside. It's not the real deal, but even photos and videos of nature scenes have proved to provide a physiological benefit for folks. Plants in the office have been shown to significantly increase workplace satisfaction, productivity, work engagement, self-reported levels of concentration, and even perceived air quality. So if you are able to have some green around you at work, then bonus. I do not have a green thumb. My husband does. But a student last year gave me a plant that I put in my little window, and I just make a habit to try and water it on Mondays and Fridays. That way I have a small chance of watering it at least once a week. But it actually really does, boost your mood to have a little green in there. And it's kind of fun to watch them grow too. You can get a little plug-in or a diffuser with some evergreen scent, again, to improve your mood, and have some background nature sounds. There was a study that shows that listening to nature sounds at work helps us feel more productive, and we're more positive about our work environment than if we had white noise or just no noise at all. So noise canceling earphones. So those are some things that you can do in your work environment too. So how much do you need? Remember that you can calm that sympathetic response within 5 minutes. You'll have less facial tension just by going outside in less than a minute. So the goal really though is trying to get at least 15 minutes every day outside. As women, moms, wives, we probably hide out for 15 minutes in the bathroom or the closet for me time anyway. So just go outside and do that. And, you'll get a double bonus there. And often 15 minutes turns into more too. Every week you should try and just get to a park, have a lunch outside. The goal is the benefit will be more the longer you're in nature. So every day get a small amount, every week get a little bit more, and then every month try and just spend a day in a natural environment. So again, we have a lot of really great state parks in Minnesota if you're zooming in from Minnesota. And again, that natural killer cell response will actually hang around for 30 days, which is why once a month it's great to be able to kind of get that longer immersion in nature. Also, again, if you're in Minnesota, you're going, okay, Jody, well, there's only a handful of months in the year that is pleasant to be outside. But we know that even in unfavorable conditions, so blustery winter days or rainy days, participants in studies will say that they didn't necessarily enjoy their time outside, or maybe some people did, but they still reached those benefits, and their blood pressure was lower and their cortisol levels were lower, and they felt better after being outside, even if the conditions weren't absolutely perfect. And I will tell you that all the photos that I shared on here are from all different Minnesota state parks. So we have access to all of these locations. So seek them out. Leave your phone and other distractions behind. We know that being in nature or walking with your phone is not as beneficial as if we disconnect. So slow down, go outside, notice what's around you, listen to the birds and the wind and the crackling of the leaves under your feet. And you really will notice a benefit in your well-being.
Jody, thank you. We were fortunate today, both of you, both Emily and Jody, you did a phenomenal job helping us with our reconnection to nature, both in what we eat and actually getting out there. So thank you so much. Thank you also to everyone who joined. We do have a couple questions, Jody, if you're up for answering them. One was, are you able to recommend or prescribe outside activities for your patients?
Yes, so you absolutely can. In fact, I talked a little bit about some of those other countries that are doing that. So it is a common practice in, I believe it's Norway, that they prescribe outdoor time. So nice. Absolutely.
Yep. Is it better to break up that hour a week, or is it more beneficial to do it all together? An hour hike, or what's better? Because a lot of times we hear exercise. If you can't do 30 minutes, just do 10 minutes a piece. So what benefits us the most?
I would say any time you can get small amounts, get it. If you have the opportunity to be immersed in longer periods of time, do it. Because a lot of those studies do show that it's a cumulative effect. So again, if folks are in nature for 2-3 days, they're going to get more of a benefit than 15 minutes, even though there's a significant benefit for 15 minutes. And I think that's the reason too why the PTSD and the ADHD folks will get a better benefit from more prolonged episodes in nature too. So I would say, yes, get small amounts when you can. And if you have the opportunity to get a little longer once a week, then great.
Great. And on a side note, Jody, what program allowed you to make those images on your slides?
Good old PowerPoint. I just use clip art, and then there's a method in PowerPoint to do animation and things like that too. Some of the clip art, you can get transparent backgrounds.
Great. And Stephanie, a question for you. How long will the recording be available to individuals, and how do they access the recording?
The recording, I want to do this. The recording will be available when we send out the survey. to follow up with the event, because everyone will receive a survey. And then also we do post it on our internet site under Mayo Clinic Health System, under blogs and stories. So we always leave the video up after the event, and the survey will tell you when it's posted on the live internet site of Mayo Clinic Health System.
Great. Well, we've got 5 minutes left, so I open it to those of you that are still on. Do you have any more questions for Emily or Jody? I guess one for you, Jody, is if we get close enough to nature that we get to smell the cow manure and all of that, do we get extra points for that?
You know, I'm not aware of any data on the benefits of the smell of cow manure, but you know what? If you're surrounded in trees and you can have some other smells that might kind of overcome that, then I would say yes.
I do know when I go to my kids' farm, and it's because it is stepping out in nature with all the trees, but there's also a lot of fragrance around when you're in farm country. So
Absolutely. And we know that animals can provide some health benefits too.
yeah. Well, if there's no further questions, again, thank you, Emily, and thank you, Jody, for a wonderful presentation for our attendees. And thank you, attendees, for joining as well. Like Stephanie said, a brief survey will be sent out within the next few days. Please take that opportunity to complete the survey. It really helps us formulate what we should have at our next sessions. So your opinion matters, and please share it in your survey. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.